Welcome to Energy Thinks, a podcast about the oil and gas industry's role in the energy future. I'm Tisha Schuller, your host and the CEO of Adamantine Energy. Listeners know that we are at a pivotal time, a time I'm calling the moment. Forces are conspiring to lay bare the myth of a simple and quick energy transition. Now, usually I am talking to guests on the show, people in and around the oil and gas industry, to get their take on what you, the oil and gas leader, needs to know. But due to some scheduling challenges and a lot of recent travel on my part, I am giving you a solo episode. I hope you're enjoying this format. Thank you so much for the awesome feedback that I've been getting. I'm really enjoying getting your thoughts on my thoughts. We will be returning to the interview format. We've got several awesome interviews lined up, so stay tuned for those as well. Now, you may also know that I have a weekly newsletter called Both of These Things Are True. I hope you will go to our website, energythinks.com, and subscribe. You can follow me on Substack or on LinkedIn. We publish the newsletter on both those formats. All right, with that, I'm going to jump into today's episode. So I'm recording this on Tuesday. You'll hear this on Thursday. And markets are upended a bit, shall we say, after the tariffs that have been imposed. And so I thought what I would do is not try to do some hot takes on what's going on, because there'll be plenty of that and they will undoubtedly be a little stale by the time you listen to this. But I've been thinking a lot about us as individuals and as leaders in times of volatility and uncertainty. And what does this mean for how we build our strategy, how we lead our organizations, how we show up as energy leaders, as oil and gas leaders? And so I thought I'd reflect back on what other times of volatility and uncertainty, what I learned from those, and see in the end, as I meander through that little bit of history and storytelling, if that lands us at some takeaways for each of us. All of you are going through a parallel process right now, trying to figure out how to show up as a leader, as an individual, during a time of, it feels unprecedented, but it's never unprecedented, just time of volatility on many fronts, politically, economically, in the energy transition or the energy climate conversation. And so we're all trying to figure this out. So I look forward to hearing how you're processing this and what your takeaways are as well. So let's harken back to when I graduated from Stanford University in the early 90s. There had been a rather short recession, but hiring was definitely slow. And so here I am with my degree from Stanford, my $20,000 of debt, which was more money than I'd ever even heard of. It was a terrifying burden, which I know is laughable today. I can't send my own kids to college. But I was focused on getting a job, and jobs were not easy to come by. I was in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was looking for something to do with my environmental science degree. I was filling out 30-page applications to work at everything from the EPA to environmental NGOs. I had an internship at the U.S. Geologic Survey, but they weren't going to continue it. And interestingly, after applying to, 40 jobs, the one job offer I got was as an administrative assistant for an environmental consulting firm. And that environmental consulting firm happened to consult to the oil and gas industry, which was the first of many funny twists and turns in my career that got me to where I am today. But the thing I definitely took away from that experience, and I imagine a lot of my Gen X listeners feel the same, is that you just never take a job for granted. Like when we grew up, jobs were hard to come by. We often had more than one of them at a time. While I was trying to find a job, I worked as a preschool teacher. I had many jobs from barista to office admin during college. And so getting that job, I felt like I won the lottery. My salary was $26,000 a year. I bought an entire bar of beers because I thought I was so rich. And I was psyched. I was commuting an hour and 15 minutes each way in the Bay Area across the Golden Gate Bridge to that job. And I would go to the library and get books on tape on cassette for that interminable commute. But I loved the job. It informed a lot of what came next for me And I stayed with that company for several years. In fact, moved to Boulder, Colorado, where I still live in Boulder County today because they asked me to open an office for them in the Rocky Mountains just a couple years later. So let's fast forward then until that was the early 90s and the late 90s. It might be interesting. I'm going to take a quick tangent. Why did I leave that company? So, okay, I mentioned my $28,000 of debt. I got promoted within that very small company till I was a regional manager, which just meant I was, as the boss of myself in the Rocky Mountains. But I got to go to a regional manager meeting so it was, I don't know, 5 or 6 of us. The CEO was taking us out to show us a good time. And I watched him lose $20,000 in one night playing roulette. And I was so mortified, one, to just see that much money, period, out in public. Like, it just seemed like crass. But then second, to see it lost. And I immediately set about looking for a new job. There's no way I was putting my economic fortunes into the hands of someone willing to lose that kind of cash on roulette. So I ended up switching companies, moving into environmental consulting. I had several environmental consulting jobs, but by the end of the 90s, I was a regional manager. I had 6 real offices this time with like 200 employees. All our work was mining and oil and gas. And then, I'm jumping ahead too far. Okay, the late 90s was the .com bust. So that I was still, an individual contributor at that point in my career, working in environmental consulting for the oil and gas industry. And the .com bust, it didn't affect me that personally because in our business, people weren't losing their jobs and whatnot. But my now husband and I, we didn't get married till 2001, but we had just started, our little baby 401ks where we, put $20 a month in. And, when you finally have money to put into the markets and watch it just lose so much value, especially in the thing you thought was going to go up forever, it was really formative. So what it essentially taught me was, one, invest for the long term. And you'll probably find a lot of Gen Xers that are pretty conservative in our investment strategies, but also be skeptical, right? Be skeptical of what everyone is saying is the thing and the thing you got to do. And it did feel like we were missing out, like all the cool kids were doing these other things, these cool, early tech things. And we were doing our pretty normal environmental consulting jobs. It also made me a big saver, and everyone who works at Adamantine knows I'm obsessed with their early contributions to their 401ks. And the value now, being where I am in my life of having been saving since I was in my early 20s is extraordinary. Okay, I know this is all pretty personal, but it does form how one thinks about the crises of the moment. Okay, so now I'm accelerating ahead to 2007-8. So at that time, I had, switched jobs a couple times, moved up the ladder, and now I ran a region, the Rocky Mountain region. We did oil and gas and mining work. I had 6 offices, about 200 employees. And that was the first real financial crisis that I experienced, where I had a lot of responsibilities. I had a young family. My kids were born in 2003 and 2007. So yeah, I had like a baby and a 4-year-old. And the mandate came down, lay off 15% of your staff. And there's a lot of weird math that goes into stuff like that. Like, is it 15% of our salaries? Is it 15% of our people? How do you do this? How do you set yourself up for the long run? That was the first time I ever had to do anything like that. And I tried to sit in every single meeting that we laid off staff in order to do a couple of things. One, just see the humanity and the direct effects and not shy away from the direct effects of the people that were losing their jobs. Because for those that were around, you remember, but at times like that, things feel apocalyptic. They feel directionally like they might be going down forever. So if you lose your job, you don't know if you'll ever get one again, is how it feels like. The other thing I learned from that, in addition to just not shying away from the humanity, the reality of how these things affect people, is many of the people that I laid off, I interacted again with many times over the years ahead. I ran into them at conferences, at airports. I have burned into my memory a baggage claim interaction with a couple that I had laid off. And this world that we all work in is so small. And having a general philosophy of humanity and kindness is good. But even if you just want to be Machiavellian about it, you don't want to burn bridges. Like, these things come around and go around. And so that was deeply formative, just always knowing that even when times feel like they're going great, that these moments of correction happen. And, my company is small, but we try to run it very, very conservatively, just knowing that these sort of things happen and they have real impacts on people. So then shortly thereafter, in 2009, I left consulting and went and ran the Colorado Oil and Gas Association for 5 years. Some of you have read my book, Accidentally Adamant, where I talk about how and why I did that and what was the journey. But while I was there was that was when the shale revolution happened. So my challenges at the time were really more about opposition, the fracking wars, opposition to oil and gas. I have a lot I could say about that, but it's not particularly pertinent to today's topic. So I'll try to keep those tangents to a minimum. But here was one thing that happened. Some of you may remember there was a pretty big price correction around 2014. And I remember as it was just setting up, because Koga had grown under my time there from 4 people to 13 people. We'd expanded the membership. We'd increased dues pretty dramatically. And so I did feel that I needed to keep an eye on sort of that macroeconomic environment, particularly for our members. And I remember asking my very, very trusted industry leader, like, what's going to happen? How low could oil go? And what do I need to be thinking about? And he said, oil will never go below $70 a barrel. And I indexed around that in my mind. I was like, okay, this is what that means. This is how I'll do my planning. And within a few weeks, I can't remember how low oil went. Some of you remember, but oil dropped precipitously. And that taught me something really important too, which was in these times, you have to keep your own counsel and you have to come to your own conclusions about what is likely to happen or not happen. So in 2015, I left the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. I set up Adamantine. For those of you that are paying attention, that was 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, I founded Adamantine with my colleague who's still here, Lindsey Slaughter. Much thanks to Lindsey for sticking through all of these ups and downs with me. And it won't be any surprise to know that the most formative drama that we've all had in the intervening 10 years was, of course, COVID. We had grown the firm to 6 people, very slowly, very methodically, very carefully. COVID hit. We work, entirely for the oil and gas industry. You all remember the dark day when oil went negative. And I learned a ton during that time, especially as a small business owner. But part of it was, again, it comes back to this idea of everyone's shared humanity. There was so much drama, particularly in those early days of COVID, and it was easy to be caught up. I remember thinking, am I going to lose the business? And therefore, am I going to lose my house? And therefore, are my children not going to be able to go to college? Like, I was so just caught up in the swirl of my own drama that I would have been rendered, I think, ineffective, except I stopped and realized every single person in my orbit was going through the same thing. And so we as a firm just started to focus relentlessly on our clients. What does the world look like to them? If they're making cuts, we voluntarily cut our contracts to match their layoffs or budget cuts. And we really started positioning ourselves as Adamantine to be there for the industry in a post-COVID world. So really playing the long game, all in service of these relationships that now I and my colleagues here at Adamantine have spent, our careers building. So that's a quick tour of the ups and downs financially. But as I sit here and reflect, there were actually 2 other events that probably have been even more formative on how I think about volatility and crisis and how to show up as an individual, as a leader, as someone representing our industry to the public. And that was in 2010. My community was hit by the 4 Mile fire, which at the time was the most devastating fire in Colorado history. We lost 169 homes of about 400, just to give you some context. It started a mile from my house. I had been in the volunteer fire department before I had my kids. My husband still is in our volunteer fire department. This was a just very scary, very dramatic, very devastating experience. And when we were evacuated, we were told not once, but twice that our home had burned down. So there was this, again, I referenced this earlier, but there was a sense we were out of our house for 6 weeks because they had to rebuild all the power infrastructure, et cetera. And there was a sense, it felt like we were in the apocalypse, right? There was just this time froze, and it felt like not only were things terrible, but that they would be terrible forever. And then, of course, we didn't lose our home, but our neighbors, many of our neighbors and friends did. And there was this, multi-year process of rebuilding. And that's one of those things that has been more formative to my thinking. But before I tell you about that, I'll tell you about the flood. So then 3 years later in 2013, Colorado-wide had devastating floods. But because we were in a burn scar, a significant burn scar, our canyon lost all of our bridges, 100% of the bridges down, about 10 miles of the canyon. Most of the road, it took over 5 years to get the road rebuilt. I couldn't get home. My kids had to get evacuated in the largest airlift since Katrina. And my husband was doing rescues the whole time as well, as well as being there with 2 relatively small children and his father. They were all at home when that happened. While all that was going on, I couldn't get home. The activists ended up hiring a helicopter and saying that hundreds of oil and gas wells that were underwater were leaking. And I will just say none of that was true. But I'm having this very, very personal, devastating family crisis. And then I have to go on national and Colorado TV and radio shows for about 72 hours. I just did back-to-back interviews. For the industry, we set up a place where I could gather all the information because, of course, I didn't know if there were 100 leaking wells under the water. So we had to pull together all of our industry resources. We had to make sure we understood exactly what was happening. And then I had to go out and be the face of the industry. And it was just the most intense experience of my life. And then when we got through that, of course, we couldn't get home for weeks. And then when we did get home, it took hours to drive home because it was a 1-lane dirt road for 7 miles outside of town. And so I ended up living separate from my family for almost a year. So it was quite a lot. Okay. Why did I tell you all of that? Because the weird thing is now I'm still back in my house with my lovely little family in my community I adore. And 12 years has passed since that happened. And so there's a few things I take away from all these experiences that I want to share with you. And I'll be interested to hear if they resonate with your life experiences, or if you're relatively new in your career, are these interesting or useful insights to how to think about these things going forward? I think the most important takeaway for me is that whenever you're in the middle of something that feels really intense, maybe even apocalyptic, kind of doomsday-ish, I like to imagine myself in 2 years looking back on it. In 2 years, I know how this movie played out. In 2 years, I have some sense of stability, of being on the other side. I know how I behaved in it, and I maybe have some thoughts for myself on how I could have done it better. So when I had looked back and reflected upon these various crises, and in particularly the more personal, intense ones, because that's where I think we're more likely to behave badly. At least I'm more likely to behave badly if I feel personally threatened or that my family's well-being is at risk. It's now I imagine my future self telling me, lean into the uncertainty of this. It will not be uncertain forever. Like, it will play out. That's the weird thing about time. It moves on. And we know at some point, we know how this movie ends. And I never wished I was more melodramatic in the past, right? I always wish I was more calm, more certain that things would in some way sort themselves out. And I think the way we do that is by imagining a range of outcomes and hedging both to the risks and hedging to the upsides. I know there are some of you out there that maybe make really big bets in times of uncertainty, but I suspect that those really big bets, those are for people who either don't have a lot to lose, or those really big bets are just still a fraction of their larger resources. Or at least you're never going to find me betting the well-being of my family, my future retirement, my business, and my employees. You're not going to find me betting the farm. I'm going to try to find a middle way that is responsive to risks and is positioning for upside. So that's one thing. All right. The second thing I've learned over these different experiences is that freaking out is contagious. And so, one, if you happen to be hanging out with a lot of people who are freaking out, consider how you're going to get yourself grounded. Because either you only have two choices: take a break or actually be the more influential force. So I strive in my life, among my friends, my family, my coworkers, I strive to be the one that sets, to be the thermostat, to set the temperature. And I try to do that by bringing stability, calm, the long view, the bringing out the best in yourself. Because if freak out is contagious, so is calm. But this takes a kind of mindfulness, a kind of staying alert to how you're feeling, to bring that into your relationships and into the experience. Like I said, I've never looked back and wished I was more melodramatic. But once you find yourself in the melodrama cycle and the reactionary cycle, it's actually hard to tear out of it. It's a little bit addicting. It gets its own momentum. I think we are each well served by deciding how we want to show up and then making sure that we do that with a kind of intensity that other people pivot their point of view to ours rather than vice versa. And then the third thing is really to be always in disruption and volatility, looking for opportunity. What is that opportunity? Is it an acquisition? Is it a positioning? Is it relationships? And by having some faith that there is an upside, that there is an opportunity in any uncertainty, in any crisis, that allows us to be generous spirited. Because whether we approach, these times with a scarcity mindset or with an abundance mindset, that's fundamentally at its heart a choice. And by being certain that there is opportunity to be had, if only we can be clever enough and open-minded enough to find it, that allows us to be generous of spirit and how we show up, the grace that we give, our fellow humans, our coworkers, but also generous actually in our giving. If you're not thinking about your local food bank right now, I think that times like these are really important that we all participate in those that are truly, truly vulnerable in this moment. So at its heart, looking for opportunity, the flip side of that coin is a kind of generosity of spirit. So that's what I got for you today. I'll be interested to hear how you are approaching this moment, the volatility, how you're drawing upon your past, what you've learned from other experiences. And if anything I said here, you think I got wrong, I love stress testing my ideas with you. I'd love to hear what you think. So that's our episode for today. I'd like to thank my colleague, Kayla Chieves, for pivoting quickly and making this a solo episode. Thanks for your help and for the quick turnaround. If you're interested in our work at Adamantine, how we're helping companies address uncertainty with a range of strategic planning options, we do workshops, we do briefings, then check us out at energythinks.com. I hope that while you're there, you will subscribe to my weekly newsletter. Both of these things are true. Until next time, I'm Tisha Schuller, wishing you and yours happiness, prosperity, and good health.